morning, everybody. As a visual artist, I wanted to explore the role that art has in public diplomacy. So why is art a powerful tool in public diplomacy? Well, I found its relevance in culture diplomacy, in its creative approach to developing unique program settings, attracting diverse audiences, stimulating public dialogue on social issues, and ultimately inspiring action to make change. So for today, my discussions break down by three components. My field research, which comprises from my trip to Cuba. I went twice, both in May and in December, under President Obama's People-to-People initiative, and USC also has a license to study, and I went with some of my colleagues here in this room as well. And my field practice, I was a UNESCO intern since January, and in my future initiative project, which is You and Imagine, it's an annual multimedia event. So in May, we happened to see the Havana Biennale, and I was interested in looking at the different types of art in public spaces. And so the 11th Biennale was important for its interaction with these, with public arts and being able to invite social dialogue and have partnerships. It was established in '84 by the Wilfredo Lam Center for Contemporary Art in partnership with the Ministry of Culture. And so there was about 180 participants from about 45 different countries, and the next Biennale will be in 2015. And Cuba thrives with its tourism in culture. The United States is actually the leading tourist, there's a lot of tourists from the United States. And so the United States is the one that leads with bringing in a lot of tourists, and for the 11th Biennale, there was over 1,300 Americans registered for the Biennale. So here are some examples of particular pieces that invoke social dialogue on. This is a theater with fiberglass ants. Okay, so these are two particular images that invoke discussions on travel, and the other piece is on recycled art, and it talks about the lack of iron in the country, and that's the scientific element for iron. And one collective that I noticed was the partnership, international partnership with JR and Cuban French artist and Cuban photographer Jose Parla. And in this collaborative effort, they used 25 senior citizens and took their images throughout and pasted them around the city. And so this is part of an international project that they have in Japan, and actually in their own back home in East LA, they have a couple of these images as well that really talks about the seniors around the world. And so they were participating along with the Biennale as well, and that's them featured below. And so in December, I traveled once again. I was inspired from my first trip, and I wanted to know more about other international festivals and other international art gatherings. And so I went to the Havana, the 34th Annual International Film Festival, which ran from December 4th to the 14th. And it's a very popular international event, bringing a lot of filmmakers, actors from all over Latin America and the Caribbean. And so it's a very famous Cuban pastime, and it was started by Alfredo Guevara, who recently passed away this year, as a way that Fidel was using it to promote his initiatives with the Communist Party. But Guevara was as an artist, decided that this was film was a perfect medium to educate the masses and to invite other international voices into the island. And so I surveyed about 100 participants from artists, filmmakers, tourists, Cubans, anyone that really just wanted to talk to me about films and why they want to go. And so most people, they make a day out of it. And so here is a copy of one of the publications where each day they print out the film screenings for the day in the different theaters that are showing them. Unfortunately, there's no synopsis, so only you have is the name of the film, the director, and the country that you're going to be, that's the origin of the film. And so one downside was that you didn't know what film you were going to, but the plus was that you actually went out your way and communicated with both tourists and Cubans alike to know what they liked, which ones they preferred, which ones they knew was a good film. And so it got people talking. And the other is a poster that they have an annual competition around. And so these were both communication materials that promoted the film festival, along with the newspapers and the radio and the television as well. And as I mentioned, I had the opportunity of interviewing a couple of filmmakers, and so I had the opportunity of meeting Ivan Goloa, who he started this short film called Los Retratos, Portraits. And so he is of Colombian descent, and he was invited by a Swiss filmmaker that he met at the Swiss Film Festival. And so you see these interactions here. And so up in the top corner, you have the pasaporte, which is a passport, and you have, it's about like 5 kooks, maybe like 5 cents each, 50 cents each screening or so. And you had your passport that you would go along to each theater, and it was valid there, and you would just, each film that you saw, they would take one out. So it was just very interesting to see his perspective on the festival and his invitation. And so in comparing both the Biennale and the Film Festival in terms of public diplomacy, I looked at the different types of art. And so the Biennale was mixed in the sense that it was not just the visual arts, there was dance, there was music. The Film Festival was mostly film, but there was concerts, there was some photography exhibits as well, but primarily the medium was just film. The audience was both heavily mixed. Both of them are during peak tourist seasons in Cuba. The cost for the Biennale it's primarily free. Some museums you have to pay a certain entrance, but it really depends. The film festival, roughly 50 cents per screening, and it's pretty cheap. Most Cubans they didn't have a problem with the cost. The downsides to each of the Biennale was that it was very hard to determine the turnout. You'd have to go to each and every single museum, and it was very, I have a copy of a map, and it was very scattered throughout Havana, and so it was very difficult to go around, and most museums did not keep a track of those kind of records and wouldn't allow me any access as well. And so there also, when you go to those spaces, they didn't have, they had a lot of misinformed docents or art educators at those spaces. You would ask, what's this piece about? And it was really hard. So a lot of the pieces were up to interpretation, which is a lot of what art does generally, but when you don't have someone who's there that does know information, it's very difficult to engage. And so the film festival, the timings of the film screenings, not everyone lived in central Havana. And also the film summary. Though it was a plus that I mentioned that you got people to engage, but it was very difficult to know, oh, what is this film about? And most of the popular films were from South America, and you know, it was all on word. It's like, oh, this film is really good. The upsides of the Biennale, the interactions with public space. The art was along the Malecón and along those public spaces where there's a lot of interaction with both tourists and locals. And so that was a great interaction there. The film festival, you can measure the turnout. You could see how many people are attending by the amount of tickets are being sold, and you could see how full the rooms are. And so most screenings would hold up anywhere between 250 to about 350. And the sizes varied, but it was very easy to get to each of the theaters. And they're all in central Havana for the most part. And so I decided to take my experience from the field and put it into practice. And so I had the opportunity this semester to intern with UNESCO New York office as their cultural diplomacy intern. And so I worked on several projects with their office, and I'm actually still with their office this year. And so my first project was Journeys to School, which profiled 11 countries and the way that children go to school. And so it talked about education. The second was our artist, Marcus Miller, who's a American jazz player. And he was holding a concert on behalf of UNESCO for the remembrance of slavery. And then the last but not least is the documentary on Tim Harrington, who it was 2 years ago that he passed away in Libya. He's a war photographer. And so UNESCO used this documentary to talk about the safety of war journalists and the safety of journalists in general. And so I decided to take what I learned both in the field and in my practice into creating an event called UN Imagine. And so this would be a multimedia event in response to, right now, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is proposing for the post-2015 Millennial Development Goals, pushing youth to really get involved with the world campaigns. And so as you can see, we're on Twitter, we're on social media, and a lot of it is visual interactions. And so I got the idea of hosting this UN Imagine, driven by UN youth, mostly UN interns. And the interns are composed, what I've learned in my experience the last couple months is that the UN cannot function without the help of interns. There are over 400 interns within the UN system. And so the UN interns have the opportunity and platform to propose this event to Ban Ki-moon. And so it's still in the process. But anyways, this initiative would be to expand the understanding, to increase the understanding of the changing role of art has as a tool for public diplomacy. And the tentative date is for later in June, and held at the UN. And so my dream team panel speakers, if I had my wish, and which we're still working on, we have a couple of familiar faces on here. And I'll mention, due to time, I won't mention all of them, but Stephanie Stallings, who I want to highlight, she has been a great support so far. And she's part of Arts Diplomacy Network that has over 100 participants within her database that are using, both in the State Department, both nationally and internationally, of people and programs that are using art diplomacy currently. And then also Ahmed, who is the UN Youth Envoy, and he's just great, trying to, actually today he's having a Google Hangout for youth to really get their voice into the UN. And so there will be a gallery showcase with a panel discussion as well, and a high presence on social media. As my colleagues have mentioned, the importance of social media, both on Facebook and Twitter. And then the evaluation for this project would be to see how much we've impacted through, what kind of imprint we have on social media, having a survey both pre and post, and developing a report as well. And like I said, this would be an annual event. And so it's still in the process, so I will be happy to give you guys more updates. And so overall, as you can see, with the Havana Biennale, the Havana Film Festival, and UNESCO, both my field research, my practice, and my initiative, I see that the importance of art has such a value within creating a diverse audience, being able to engage in dialogue. Art has a way that is not intrusive, and I've noticed that people are more inclined to sign up for art initiative events. And you could, in that process, you could introduce your own agenda and your own initiatives, as you notice within these projects, on either education issues, on the safety of journalists. And so ultimately, these engagements inspire action and to create change in the world. And so thank you so much for your time. And I invite you to join the conversation on Arts Diplomacy Network. You can visit their website or follow them on Twitter. So thank you again.